decade. The singular pronoun is used by those who don't identify with the binary terms he or she. Sam Smith, the singer, is one of the celebrities who came out as non-binary last year and asked to be addressed as they or them. Well, joining us today to discuss this, we have editor of Spiked, Brendan O'Neill, and writer and performer Amru Al-Qadi. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. Amru, I'll come to you first. It's quite interesting, isn't it, first of all, that this term, which has been in the dictionary since the dictionary was invented, is now in there again for something else. Amru, what's your initial feeling about this?
Well, actually, that's an interesting point. Actually, the they pronoun has been used as a singular pronoun. Even Shakespeare used to use it. It's always been there. It's just, I think, society's become reacquainted with it as a thing. But to be honest, I slightly resent having to come on a TV show to sort of debate my right to use the they pronoun, because I don't think trans lives are really up for debate. What I would like to ask Brendan is this. For a journalist who edits a magazine that is literally an advocate for free speech, why is it you throw tantrums like an insecure child at the idea of people like me using they pronouns? I read your really, really shameful piece on Sam Smith. I mean, shouldn't everyone be allowed to identify however they like? Who are you to police what other people's pronouns are when the whole mission of Spiked, as far as I understand it, is to advocate for a society that's full of free speech and a diversity of belief systems and ideas?
Brendan, I'll allow you to answer Amru yourself.
Well, you know, it's precisely because Spiked believes in freedom of speech and I believe in freedom of speech that we are worried about some of the excesses of the transgender movement. This is a movement that threatens physical violence against feminists if they say that a man cannot become a woman. This is a movement that has shut down meetings of feminists. This is a movement which has shouted down feminists and one elderly woman who gathered in Hyde Park to express their concerns about the Gender Identity Act. This is a movement that is deeply censorious. And my issue with the use of the word they to describe an individual, it's correct that it is a quirk of the English language that you can use the word they to refer to an individual if you don't know that person's sex. But most of the time, they means plural, and that's how most people understand it. And I'm very worried about the creation of this elitist new language with words like they, non-binary, cisgender, heteronormative, the kind of words that ordinary people do not use, but they are used by a new elite to signal that they are good people, to signal that they are part of the in club, and anyone who refuses to use them or who fails to use them is shut out and demonized and written off as transphobic. So I'm worried about the Orwellian rearrangement of language to satisfy very small numbers of people.
You talk about demonization, but I think what we have seen in society over the past few years is the demonization of trans people, okay? Ever since this sort of constant debate around transgender lives that has been happening in the British media for the past few years, there has been an 81% spike in trans hate crimes alone last year. 2 in every 5 trans people have been attacked on a bus. I was attacked on a bus. I think that people being demonized are actually the minority here and some of the most vulnerable in society. And I think we all try and pretend that this is some sort of debate which has a pro and a con side, but these are people's lives. Well, I don't think... Can I finish? Trans people aren't a movement, as you say. They're not an ideology. They're not a belief system. Trans people are merely people trying to live their lives who don't, for whatever reason, fit into the binary. Some of them do fit into binaries, but don't fit into traditional kind of gender in the way that people would understand it. And I think instead of trying to debate them away, what we might be able to do instead is understand that there are different ways of being and become tolerant. I think what you're basically refusing to allow is basic respect for trans people. And you can dress it up as Orwellian language or whatever kind of way you want to kind of package what is essentially intolerance, but that's all it is, Brendan.
Well, I've always made a distinction between trans people and the trans movement. I know trans people fit into society very well, and most of them are just interested in getting on with their lives as best they can. The trans movement, on the other hand, the kind of self-selected spokespeople for trans people, has become a deeply intolerant movement. I think it's very ironic that you would accuse others of intolerance when we live in a world in which anybody who questions gender self-identification, particularly a woman, as we saw with the Maya fire for starter case, where she effectively lost work because she questioned the cult of transgenderism. There is an intolerant clampdown on anyone who questions the way in which language is changing, and anyone who questions the right of people who were born as men to go into women's spaces. There is an absolute censorious, intolerant clampdown on those people, and this is what concerns some of us about the transgender movement, not trans people. The transgender movement does look increasingly like a movement for censorship and also a misogynistic movement, to the extent that it is constantly censoring women in particular, who raise concerns about who is allowed into their spaces, who is allowed into their changing rooms, and who is allowed on all women shortlists and so on. I'm very worried about the way in which transgenderism has become almost a PC form of misogyny, and that's something that I think trans activists really need to face up to when they're talking about changing language.
Amber, do you think there's work to be done on both sides here? Because it sounds like both sides of this debate, particularly both of you, are very passionate on polar opposite sides of this debate. Do you think there's work to be done in understanding each other and educating each other? At the start of this interview, I said, good afternoon to you both, gentlemen, and that was a slip. I'm very sorry about that, Amber. That was not me standing against you. That was just a slip. But again, it's about education. It's about people getting used to this new dialogue, this new terminology, Amber.
Yeah, what I think really, really worries me and what I have seen happen is it's this constant framing of trans lives as a debate, right? Because the problem is if you're trans and you're constantly having to debate your right to self-define, it becomes exhausting. Because if you try and debate the validity of a life, you're also able to debate it away. And what trans people have had to suffer, especially in the British media, I've got trans friends around Europe and also in America who, when they come here, really notice a really marked sort of constant conversation on what it is to be trans. Are trans women really women? The fact of the matter is, I think, is trans people have always existed. They've existed for centuries, from the Hijra community in South Asia to we have documents of them existing in Georgian England in the 18th century. They have always existed and will always continue to exist. And what I would rather move away from is not the conversation on transness as an idea, but just how society can better accommodate their needs, because they are in the minority. They are more prone to suicide. 81% spike in trans hate crime. That's where I think the conversation should be. I think we should be shifting away from the conversation around trans people and whether they threaten cis women, because that is it's a mythology. And I know there is some stuff online of trans women potentially, but I think that online space is, I don't think, conducive to that discourse.
Brendan, what is so threatening about the trans community having their own term? I know Amory referenced an article you wrote about Sam Smith, and he was somebody who publicly came out and said, look, this is something I've been battling with my whole life. I finally find a term that I feel comfortable with, and I can continue like this. You know, it makes him feel safe. It makes him feel like he can be at peace with himself. So what's so bad about, you know, them adopting a term that they feel comfortable with? Why should people get angry about that? It's a word.
The thing is that, firstly, no one is debating away trans lives. Everyone I know completely and utterly accepts the right of trans people to exist and the right of trans people to have the same rights as everyone else in society. What we're talking about is ideological, moral questions. So, for example, Amru says that people are calling into question the idea that trans women are women. I think it is perfectly legitimate to question whether someone who was born a male and who went through male puberty and who has enjoyed a male life becomes a woman simply by declaring himself or herself to be a woman. That is a perfectly legitimate thing to debate, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to talk about in a free society. And I would be very worried about any attempt to stop that discussion, which has happened. The point is that language is a universal. Language belongs to all of us. We can't simply change language, and this is why I mentioned Orwellian. This is why I mentioned Orwellianism. The plot of 1984 is a new elite attempting to control how people think by changing the words that they use.
I do have to point out the linguists will point out that language does evolve over time and take on new meanings. Amru, final word from you in terms of, you know, they, them is being named as the word of the decade, and it symbolises so much more than a term for the trans community to live under. It sort of defines the fact that it's becoming accepted in society now and talked about, and we're progressing. Is that how you're seeing it?
Well, can I just say that idea of this Orwellian kind of orchestration of language? I think what you're doing, I've read your article about Sam Smith. You just say most people in society would say that's a man, therefore that's the case. I think it's you who have this really homogenizing idea of what people are like. It's more complicated than that. All I can explain is, for me, when people use the they them pronoun, I feel much more relaxed and I feel safer because I don't identify as a man for whatever reason. I'm not asking anyone to change the law for me right now. All I'm asking is that people use it. And it's not that hard. I mean, you're a clever guy. I mean, you write, you edit. It's not that hard. And it's also, you use the they pronoun every single day, Brendan. If you didn't know someone's gender, if I said, my friend just bought a jumper, you'd say, oh, do they like it? Because that's the singular they in action. We use it anyway, and we're just asking for some respect. If you're not willing to offer that, that's something about you. It's not something about me, and you should probably just check your own behaviour.
Okay, Amrit and Brendan, a very impassioned debate about the term them, they, which has been named as Word of the Decade. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon here on Sky News. Thank you.